was great, and it certainly leads into what we're going to be doing at Deep en masse to really try and open up the 21st century of exploration in the mesophotic zone, which I'll be talking about here. My name is Kirk Krack. I'm a multidiscipline diver. I'm probably best known for free diving, and if you've seen some of the talk that Kyla and I gave, and I did a little bit on my history. Although I'm known for the last 25 years in free diving. Prior to that, I have been in technical diving, a mixed gas instructor trainer, and I've had a light commercial diving company and a number of businesses in that way. But now I'm the human performance dive specialist at Deep. And we are looking to take marine science fiction and turn it into marine science reality. So if you've been following us for the last several years, you've seen some pretty amazing concept art of what our vision of the 21st century of exploration should look like. But that is no longer art, that is reality as we speak, and that's what I'm excited to tell you about today. So first, a little bit about Deep. So we were formed in 2021. The concept of it happened much before that. And we came out of stealth mode about 2.5 years ago, about 2 years ago. And we have a founder who's endowed us with the idea of return on purpose before return on profit. We are a for-profit business, but we have this 200-year vision in which to make humans aquatic. That's the idea. And we want to enable humans to live, work, and thrive undersea because there's a number of reasons why we need to do that. So our focus is restoration projects, both coral and bottom trawling restoration, space analogs, bioprospecting industry, and critical industry infrastructure. And we're doing that through a number of our businesses, engineering, manufacturing, expeditions, and the Deep Institute, which I'll discuss more in a second. We have a very growing network of institutions and organizations we partner with. NOAA is very notable, Office of Naval Research, Woods Hole, and a number of groups like that which are helping us move forward. Additionally, we have a lot of expert advisors and subject matter experts. Obviously, Dr. Carnagas couldn't be with us during this talks, but there's Phil and I, and most notably, Dr. John Clark, a good friend of both Phil and I, was the former lead scientist at the Naval Experimental Diving Unit, who's now joined us on our Strategic Advisory Council. In November of 2000, the International Space Station went up with 6 people and put them into low Earth orbit. And when you look at the amount of science that has been done by 6 people in this 25-year time, it is actually staggering. And per person or per capita actually rivals what we do in the ocean. And so one of our goals is this November, we want to start to reestablish a permanent human presence in the ocean with the idea that by November of 2027, we will have, once again, a permanent human presence in the ocean. Now, you could argue that, well, there's military submarines in the ocean and there's people always underneath it, but what we want is the interaction. We want people living at ambient atmosphere and engaging and diving into the environment. And what we're doing isn't new. We're actually standing on the shoulders of giants. And if you look at the history of subsea habitats, it starts first in Conch Shelf 1 in 1962. And in that time in space, you had the beginnings of what would be Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, and all of that moved along. While at the same time as we have this whole history of these subsea habitats that were starting. So you had, space happening, and you had the Man in the Sea projects happening at the same time. And 2 things really happened from the 60s through the 80s. Number one, we learned how to live under the ocean in habitats. And the other thing we did was we learned saturation diving, the idea of going down to depth, absorbing and saturating with the gases, which allows you an unlimited amount of time in which to stay, because the decompression you will do after will remain the same regardless of whether you're there for 6 hours or 6 years. And that's the advantage of that saturation diving. The other interesting thing that's really evolved in all of this was the equipment. When you look at the 60s through the 80s, the equipment and the procedures and how we were doing that, that was largely industry. That was oil and gas, and that was military. And all of that equipment then kind of trickled down to the recreational market, to you and I. But that's interesting now, because that is actually flipped. When you look at what Phil is doing, and you look at the amount of rebreathers that are on the markets today, technical diving is driving innovation in the advancement of equipment and the procedures and the capabilities of what we're able to do. And you have militaries and oil and gas industry looking at keeping up with that. So why do we want to venture underneath the sea? Well, we need to better understand climate change. That's one of our most significant things that is challenging us in the human race. And the other thing is we need to understand and discover the unmapped biodiversity. Our goal is to dive in the mesophotic zone. We will put undersea habitats into upwards of 200 meters. That mesophotic zone means that's the deepest that light functionally has an effect on the environment. And that 200 meters, and including the shorelines, when you look at it, that's where 97% of the ocean's biodensity and biodiversity lives. Yet we know less than 20% of what actually lives there. So if you've been following the Ocean Census Program, we're trying to find 100,000 new species in the next 10 years. And it's quite amazing how there's this zone that is, the cradle of life from the oceans and the earth. And we do a really good job of diving in, up to the 30-meter range. And then what starts to happen is that we go straight to 500 meters using submersibles and things like that. And so there's that 30-meter to that 200-meter range where it doesn't get the attention it deserves. So that unmapped biodiversity is going to be our next drugs that will help cure cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, the next antibiotics. So that's the bioprospecting idea of what's out there. And plus it helps us in being able to prepare for deep space in what we call space analogs. So our current methodologies, you go on a big ocean-going vessel, $100,000, $250,000 a day. Back in the day, what did you do? You put a net down, you scraped it along the bottom, you brought it up, you threw it on the deck of the boat, you sifted through it and said, this is what, the ocean is made up of. And so now we're certainly moved beyond that. We use submersibles, but like I said, and like Phil said, in the shallow ranges, it's a big piece of equipment, lots of investment. When a diver has more capability, or we tend to get in these and we go straight to 500 meters and deeper. You have ROVs and UAVs, but that's the realm of video gamers and TV screens and being removed from the environment itself. So we do like to do diving. It's the best and most effective way, but we are limited in our bottom time, so we're good in the 30-meter zone. If you live in Australia, you can't scientifically dive past 30 meters, so there's some restrictions in that way. So you have to imagine if all of we knew of the Amazon was we helicoptered in, you fast roped down through the canopy floor, and you spent 20, 40 minutes on the floor of the Amazon collecting and then back up to the helicopter and to base. How much would we know of the Amazon? We know what we know because we go in, we pitch a tent, and we live there for months on end. And that's essentially what we're trying to do. So we are trying to blend the best of commercial diving, saturation diving, and technical diving, as Phil was saying, to get that best of both worlds in what will be scientific saturation diving, living at depth in the environment and having unrestricted access. So helping us do this, and this is Phil's main workplace, is the Deep Campus. This is in Bristol. This was one of the first investments we really made of significance. It's a quarry in Chepstow. It's 600 meters long, 100 meters wide, about 80 meters deep. You have Subs Island here, which is what you see here. These are floating docks that are 3 meters by 20 meters long. We have 40 of them. This is an older picture, but those docks now ring the whole quarry and campus. We have 55 acres of land, and it's a high-performance center. It will be where we do testing and training. We will have habitats that are in there for training, a saturation system, and it'll be a very unique place, and we currently have a lot of AUVs and ROVs and militaries that come in and use this because we have 365-day-a-year access. We're not constrained by tides and currents and weather and things like that. If you need a training place and a platform, this is what we offer. And helping us do all of this is a portion of our company called Deep Manufacturing Limited. When we first looked at how are we going to create the hulls for these underwater habitats, we realized that the industry that would help us in creating these massive hulls, you had a 10-year waiting list because the military was using them for submarine hulls. So we decided to look at advanced manufacturing, essentially 3D printing metal. And so we do, with robotic arms, a process called WAM, wire arc additive manufacturing. And that's where you take a wire and you weld it on itself and you layer it, 3D printing. And the process of doing that is over 100 years old. Using robotic arms, over 20 years old. In the aerospace industry for critical parts, it's been used for 20 years. And so we have invested quite heavily in this, and we have a number of bays, I think over 6 bays of single arms that are doing advanced manufacturing. And we're currently creating what's called the Hexabot Lab, where 6 of these arms link together in synchronization to make a much bigger metal artifact, which is our pressure hulls. And we're the first company in the world with our manufacturing process done in conjunction with DNV to class and certify us to be able to create human marine pressure vessels for human occupancy for the marine environment. And this is our guiding vision. This is our North Star. This is where we want to get to eventually, what we call the Sentinel system. You have one span here, which can have and house 6 people, up to 200 meters, infinitely expandable, month or months-long durations. We've already put in over 200,000 engineering hours, done with approval in principle by DNV. This is our guiding light. But this is a big step to get to. So along the way, we have a number of smaller steps in which we're going to prove ourselves out. And that's the interesting update that I want to talk to you today about. So just a little bit of a tour inside a Sentinel. You can see we're going to start first at the Great Hall here, a meeting area, a relaxation area where you're going to eat. From the Great Hall, we'll go up the great steps to the mezzanine. The mezzanine would be lab space for eDNA and sampling and things like that. It's an interesting idea that if I was to sample something and then bring it to the surface and decompress it, I denature it. Its proteins change. In fact, it's not the same sample that you took at depth when you get it to the surface. And so to be able to take a sample and put your hand up through the moon pool to a lab assistant who immediately in situ at depth starts doing the science on it is a staggering improvement in how we do it currently. From the lab, you would move forward through to individual staterooms. This would be a new thing in underwater habitats. Currently, 6 people crowd into the last habitat that was running. 6 people crowd into a small room, bunked on top of each other. And Dr. Carnegas, our colleague who did a NEMO mission for NASA, she was a NASA astronaut candidate, and for 2 weeks she lived in Aquarius Reef Base, she would tell you that when you're in saturation and at depth, if you don't snore, you will. And if you do snore, you'll snore louder. So at night to sleep, she would put headphones in and listen to heavy metal music because it was the only thing that drowned it out, everyone else's snoring. And we know that in saturation, there's a period of time where you start, the accumulated exhaustion starts to set in simply because you're sharing these spaces. So imagine having your own stateroom, FaceTiming your family while you're relaxing in your own private space. From an individual stateroom, here would be a unique thing, an actual head and a shower. Instead of having to swim outside the habitat to a little bubble to do your business shooing away the fish while they're trying to nip at your bits, if you know what I mean. And then you have the dive center. So for the last several years, Phil and I have both kind of told you what this was our vision of deep. So here's the new stuff that's happened. A lot of concept art so far. So here's really what's going on. In this past year, Deep Research Inc. has formed. That is our Americas, US-based office servicing the Americas. So Deep Research Labs out of the UK services Europe, Africa, Middle East, and Deep Research Inc. is the Americas. It's based in Coconut Grove in Miami, and importantly, we have now a deep station, Florida, our forward operating base in the Florida Keys, where 14 nautical miles from our forward operating base, our mission center, where we'll have classrooms, labs, hyperbarics, all of our supporting boat and operations teams. 14 nautical miles from there, you will go to our Vanguard underwater habitat. And this is Vanguard. Now you're looking at some cool concept art, but this thing actually exists. It is currently en route from Sebastian, Florida, where it was finishing its life support systems and integration, and is making a stop in Miami next week, where we have our launch party on the 29th. And then this November, December, it is placed in the Florida Keys in a reef area that is about 18 meters of depth, and the storage depth of it will be 15 meters. Now, if you look at this, we sometimes affectionately nickname this the pickle, but we don't want that to be really talked about, do we? You have the Vanguard habitat, and then the supporting infrastructure here allows for a second habitat to be put in. And our goal within the next year would be to put in what we call an ambient-only sentinel system. And it would be an ambient-only system. You wouldn't close it off and decompress in it. So it doesn't have to be a pressure vessel, which means we could have it more square, like a shipping container size that would be on here, which we can expand it in volume because it's less investment. It's less hardy in its ability to have to do decompression. And so at that point, we could have a total of 8 people go down. 4 living in here, 4 living in the ambient-only sentinel, and then when it's time to come to the surface, everyone moves into this one for the simple overnight decompression. Wake up in the morning, quick check, everyone's good. Then what happens is we blow back down, we repressurize to depth, you put your equipment on one last time, you go for one last dive, and then you swim to the surface. We call that TUP, transfer under pressure. Dive down into the habitat, dive out of the habitat, but use this to pressurize or decompress out. And so this is the moon pool. This is how you would gain access into the habitat. We'll take a little tour here. So you come up through the moon pool, your doorway into the dive locker. This is where your equipment would sit, umbilicals, gas filling, everything you would need through this pressurized hatch into the multi-purpose room. And in the multi-purpose room, this is kind of the work